Hi, and welcome to Be Your Own Best Coach Conversations, where we talk about how you can shift your mindset, change your behavior, and do more stuff you care about. I'm Glen Lubbert, one of the co-founders and instructors of Be Your Own Best Coach, a 5-week group coaching program. I'm here with my colleague and fellow co-founder, Deborah Teplow. Hi, Deborah.
Hey, Glenn. It's great to be here with you and have this conversation.
Thank you, Deborah. So today I wanted to talk with you about Tim Ferriss. He's best known as the author of the 4-Hour Workweek, 4-Hour Body, and Tools of Titans, as well as a host of the award-winning podcast, The Tim Ferriss Show. He recently spoke with tech journalist Kara Swisher on her podcast, Recode Decode, and he spoke about the challenges he's having during this lockdown and the COVID time we're living in, which I found fascinating because, he writes about how we can be more productive and more healthy, and someone that focuses on these things was also struggling in his ability to handle this. And he was talking about a story that he read about Isaac Newton during the Great Plague and how Isaac Newton was so productive during the plague, and that's what he was using as his standard during this time period, and was starting to beat himself up for being unproductive. And so he went back to his guiding principle number 1, be gentle and be kind to yourself. And I know that this connects with what we do at Be Your Own Best Coach. So I wanted to ask you about the different things that Tim Ferriss talked about in order for him to help himself during this time period, and get your thoughts on anything else that we might suggest that Tim do during this time period to help him and help others with the challenges we're all facing.
Well, first of all, I loved everything he said. It really made a lot of sense. It's very congruent with what we teach at Be Your Own Best Coach and what we try and practice and preach. So I think starting with his guiding principle of be gentle, be kind to yourself is key. It doesn't help to beat yourself up. And I think of one thing that can prevent high achievers from getting where they want is by being harsh, having that self-inner critic going all the time. So I think his thing about, and that be gentle, be kind with yourself is the basis of self-compassion. That's what self-compassion is about. I also appreciated his emphasis on what I call managing your inner space and regulating those. He talked about wide mood swings, so it's regulating your motion. Those are important. He talked about routine, and I think we could talk about that a little bit later. But just to mention that what creates so much stress today is the lack of routine and predictability. So the precursor for trauma is a lack of control and unpredictability. So
his what we have a lot of right now.
Absolutely. I mean, if anything, this period is characterized by a lack of predictability, a lack of routine. So, he talked about focusing on building some scaffolding to maintain his sanity. I certainly think that that's something that's important, and we can talk about a little bit later, maybe a few ways to do that.
That's fantastic. Yeah, the part that really struck me at the beginning, obviously, was the fact that he really looked at how he could use self-talk and really doubled down on the self-talk that he was doing. And I what you said about being a high performer like that, obviously, if he's comparing himself to Isaac Newton, that's where his mindset is. And so that is definitely how he was feeling undermined. But also that same self-talk can be repositioned to be a powerful tool.
Right. And when people think about self-talk, they think, oh, it's putting on a happy face, positive, being optimistic. I'll just say, X, Y, Z. And I think that these concepts, all of the concepts that he talked about, all the concepts we talk about that are in the news, they're super simple. It doesn't take rocket science to understand it. The flip side is, as simple as it is, it's very hard to do. And so I think that's one of the things that that was the impetus for our developing the Be Your Own Best Coach. Simple to talk about, hard to do unless you have a good system to put it into place so that you can implement it and you have an effective way to practice and develop skills. This is something you can't just understand and do. It takes practice, it takes skills, and it takes a system to put it into place.
And so one of the ways that Tim talked about putting in place was creating that scaffolding, as you said, and creating ritual and a routine. He talked about, how he and his girlfriend created a new dinner ritual. And during that dinner ritual, they lit a candle, sat at a different table that they normally sat at before, and primarily because his kitchen was being taken over as an office. So like many of us, we're making our house be our workspace. So they were using a different room for that. And then making one highlight of the day, talking about one highlight of the day that they had, and he says, even on a bad day, you still had a highlight. So that was one of the tools that he was using as that ritual and scaffolding as one of his tools.
Yeah, and those two things about using ritual, scaffolding, and even on a bad day, what's the highlight? I think those two things are something that we particularly emphasize in the work that we do and what we teach in Be Your Own Best Coach, is that small things matter. And the analogy we use is the pebble in your shoe or the burr under the saddle. You have a horse that weighs however many hundreds of pounds, and a burr under the saddle, tiny thing, but you aren't going anywhere when that burr is under that saddle. So, the small things really do count. That's one thing. And the second thing is that even in the worst of times, there is gradation. So things can suck, but they don't always suck to the same degree. So taking a moment to notice, when is things sucking less? When is it not so bad, is critical, because that can shift. You talked about shifting your perspective, your framework. That just add that tiny bit of leverage to actually transform your thinking and give you a lot of power and a more sense of agency and control.
That's really that's really fantastic. And that's really worth repeating again. So it's that, say that again, that noticing that we want to do and then what you would ask, you would advise Tim to do. What is that noticing?
Yeah. So when things are really going rough, we tend to just blanket everything or have this kind of generalized perspective. Everything sucks. Nothing stays the same, and nothing's exactly the same at one moment. So sometimes things suck, but they don't suck equally the same. Sometimes they suck a little less. So be disciplined about noticing when things aren't so bad, and see the gradation, see the gray, see the white and black, and ask yourself, what's happening that helps this be not so sucky? And that's very transformational. When is it going just a little bit better? When is it going not so bad?
So that noticing, when you notice that, one of the tools that Tim talked about that he's been using is he's been doing more of a gratitude practice and more journaling. And so I know we have journals in our program at Be Your Own Best Coach. And so when someone is interested in doing these journaling activities, what advice would you have for them and how they should approach that?
Oh, big. Well, one thing, we're all digital, but slowing down, and he did talk about slowing down. He had some really lovely things to say about slowing down, which I appreciated. Slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. So number one is slow yourself down and use a pencil or pen. Use an actual writing implement, non-digital. There's a lot of research that's been done that demonstrates that there is a different kind of mind of connection in your brain when you're writing by hand instead of typing. At Harvard, they did a test with college students taking an exam. Oh no, doing lecture notes. Those who did lecture notes on a computer, was kind of instant from the professor's lips into the keyboard. They barely heard what was being said, but because handwriting, it takes longer to do, you actually have to synthesize. You have to think about the information coming in. You have to synthesize it in a way that you can capture by hand that already takes a little bit longer. So I would advise people, number one, use analog methods. Number two, appreciate creativity and the power of creativity to help you make sense of things that are going on. So if you're going to doodle, you write something down and even draw a little picture. You don't have to be an artist. Let your creativity go and let the thoughts come to you. That's one thing. Use your pencil and paper. Second thing is Tim said what you resist persists. And so when you're pushing away, the bad thoughts, they may persist. So getting out some of that might help. At the same token, noticing what is working. So and he talked about a gratitude journal. So I would be disciplined and not allow the paper to be time that you kind of vomit up all the horror stuff. You recognize it, embrace it, don't judge it, what's going on, but do more noticing. How am I able to cope? When are times when I could have broken down? I didn't. How did I manage to do that? Also look at models. I mean, there's enough, even if they're people you're living with, you notice, hey, they got out of bed and they were cheerful. How did they do that? What was happening? I think that's also can be very, very helpful. Or we went into stories when you're seeing on media, what are the good things people are doing? A neighborhood's doing drive-by teddy bear or drive-by parties. Somebody else is doing a fashion show. I think Vera Wing is doing fashion shows. So jot down those ideas about what can help, even it's a small thing, because remember, small is big.
And also, would you think a good idea would be when you're writing about how you feel, is try to expand on the number of ways you could feel instead of just good or bad, like be more granular and try to think more specifically about what that emotion is. That helps with some of that granularity that you were talking about.
Yeah, and as a matter of fact, that reminds me that we do have a handout on emotions. And so this is a time, just as Tim Ferriss talked about Isaac Newton, time of growth, and for Newton, it was the maximum productivity. So what can we learn new, even if it's one tiny thing at a time? So it's expand your vocabulary about your experiences. So one thing is emotions. Instead of just good or bad, what is that? Go granular. Use the dictionary. Go get our handout and enhance your experiencing and your perception of what's going on with you.
Yeah, I'll add the link into the show notes for that handout, because it's what it was, 100 some words of different emotional words. Yeah, more than that. That's fantastic. Yeah, so that really helps with the gradations of how you're feeling, and so you're not black and white, good or bad. And then the other thing that around that same piece is that Tim brought up is that said that all this time of solitude, even when you're with someone, you're obviously a lot of quiet time or walking. That it's bringing to the surface things he thought he already dealt with, and that's normal. That we could be experiencing these things, and so that's the journal is an outlet for that type of thing that comes up for you.
Absolutely, and yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was talking to a physician today who said that if you don't resolve stuff from the past, it's going to come up in the present. So it doesn't mean that you want to get rid of your memories or, just dump them. It's that they don't have the same emotional intensity or activation. So how do you neutralize the more distressing emotions and allow the past to inform your thinking about today without the accompanying emotion, distress?
So I wanted to end with any other additional thoughts you had, and any positive things that we could have for our listeners and for Tim to hear that he can use or others can use going forward during this time?
You know, he said something that caught my attention, and he was saying when you're forced to go slow, you can pick apart assumptions that underlie your decision making. And we think that making assumptions is bad. You know, don't make assumptions, or assumptions is asked out of you and me. And I would like to offer a slightly different perspective, and that is to make assumptions. Make assumptions about yourself, about your capacity to grow, to learn, to cope, and to use the many, many resources, strengths, and skills that you do have. You've made it here to today. So assume that, you know, not assume is that you got here some way. So make assumptions about your power to harness those for the future, so that you're not only thriving, I mean, you're not only surviving, but you're actually thriving in the new norm.
That's fantastic, and a great place for us to wrap up. Thank you, Deborah, for your time. And yes, and thanks to everyone for listening. I want to let you know, if you want to check out beyourownbestcoach.com, you can find more information about our 5-week group coaching program. Listeners of Be Your Own Best Coach Conversations can take 10% off the enrollment cost using the word conversation. Thanks again for listening, and stay well.